Not to mention just the texturing and everything of like scratchy ink on Bristol board. It's a totally visceral experience that's you don't get by just like a smooth pen on a smooth screen. This doesn't quite work the same way in it.
Welcome back to Inspired Ink, the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Bloxdorf, and today on the show, we have Jeff Lorentz, a writer, creator, artist. He does so much. And today we talk about what it's like to actually rest as an artist, pushing yourself as a creator, and how indie comic creators can be more inspirational than mainstream creators. All this and so much more in today's Inspired Ink. Yeah, dude, your stuff has a lot of surprising elements in it. And I thought that was really interesting, as a creator. Like, you have a lot of Lovecraftian, like, kind of vibes going on inside this book. Where does some of that come from? Are you a big Lovecraft fan yourself?
While I was writing it, I was actually listening to the complete works of Lovecraft on audiobook as I was driving back and forth to work each day. So it was just I was just on my lunch break at work one day, and I started crafting this idea that eventually became what Skin of My Teeth is. You know, it started out as more of like a one-shot kind of thing, and then kind of grew naturally on its own into this bigger thing.
Dude, that's so cool. Lovecraft is a really big influence on me. I'm a really big Lovecraftian. I've really dived into a lot of his lore. Alan Moore's Providence. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that yet.
It's on my bookshelf on my TBR pile right now. I'm really
it's going to blow your mind. I think after reading your book and just like looking at what, currently as we're recording this, you have a Kickstarter up for issue 2 right now. I know it'll already be done and everything by the time this episode comes out, and congrats on hitting your goal. Great stuff. And that's where I was really curious where some of this came from. Cause Lovecraftian lore and like, it's kind of weird to call it fan fiction, you know what I mean? But like when you're pulling from that type of aspect, it's a different way to interpret a story. And that's what I found so fascinating about your work, is that you're taking this, thing you're very inspired by, and you're making it your own. Like, how did you go about that without having did you worry about anything like calling too much homage to something or pulling from too much? Or what was your kind of like mindset on being like, I'm going to make this like kind of that cultist or like Lovecraftian feel?
Yeah, I wasn't really like stressing out about it too hard. It was just kind of happened naturally, and I didn't want to go too close to anything that he had done. But I'm me, I'm my own person. I kind of naturally ended up taking it in its own way.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's not too close to what he achieved with what he did.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that's the thing a lot of creators struggle with, is just like pulling from an influence. And, they have a lot of creators, I feel like, have that stress, especially early on, where you're like, I'm pulling from this and someone's going to detect it right away and it's going to get like shut down. Or, you always feel like I need to have an original idea. I need to have an original like plot, or like, maybe I need to pull from something more original, but it doesn't work that way. When you're making art, when you're making comics, you're pulling from a million things, and then you're interpreting it like how it comes out through your mindset, through your understanding. And what you even do with your art is, dude, your color tones, all of that, it just sets the stage for something that I could tell you got a bunch of influences and just spun them on like its head. And I can't believe you did that. So, I mean, as a creator doing it on your own, how long did this take you? Like, what was going through your mindset through the process?
I started writing it last April of 2022. I drew the first issue. So this is actually like an updated version of it. I self-published a black and white version of the first 2 issues last year. And then, I built up a little bit of a following, got sold off basically all those issues. And it's like, my intention kind of from the beginning was to do that like red monochrome tones with it. And it was just because I always thought it would look really cool. And then the paper textures and everything really make it look like an older book, like an older, like, 80s in self-published book. And I got that opportunity to like kind of go back, kind of touch up a couple things along the way, make it like a little bit more cohesive, and then was able to do the Kickstarter and get that like new version that lined up with kind of how I originally envisioned that story being presented. which was I
That's
was really
so
excited to
cool.
be able to.
And it's like I feel like, especially me as a creator, I start as a writer. I'm trying to learn how to draw, and I feel like your book is like proof that like if you put your mind to it and if you put the effort out there, putting pen to paper, it just takes time and patience. What were some of the most frustrating parts about making your book? Because I feel like those are the obstacles people want to stop at, is where it gets frustrating, and they stop themselves before they could even begin sometimes.
Yeah, just finding the time and really like consistently sitting down to work on it is the hardest part. Building in that time every day to like at least get an hour of work in. Because between, I don't know, video games are awesome. And obviously I love comics. I love reading comics, but you kind of have to like purposely carve out that time, which is difficult for me because I tend to be pretty ADHD and all over the place and like immediately get sucked in. Like
Dude,
I
I
got a copy
totally
of
feel you.
Yeah. Like I got Snarlagon by Andrew Macklin in the mail yesterday, and instead of working on anything, I just read through that right in one go.
It's also probably that essence of knowing when to like rest and when you should be working productively too. Did you ever feel like you're like overworking yourself or hitting a burnout phase on this book?
Absolutely. I tend to, when I'm into something, I'm just like that's it. There was, I
Hmm.
mean, a lot of weeks I got a full-time job, obviously, but like I was spending more time working on the book than I was at my day job every week,
Oh,
which was a lot.
yeah, it's trying to understand like, you're having to do whatever you do as a day job. Like I work at a grocery store for my day job. So you're running around, you're like interacting with people, you're like lifting stuff. It's nonstop for 8 hours. And then coming back home to either, interview and do podcasts like this, or being like, well, I guess I need to work on my craft. Like it's hard to find time to do what other people do, to just relax and let their mind go away. Like I do try to give myself some forceful hours of video games to be like, well, it makes me sit and not touch my like art or my stories or the publishing stuff. And that's the biggest obstacle I feel like a lot of us have to overcome, is like
Yeah.
just allowing that time to rest.
Absolutely. You don't create work by not living. You have to have actual life experiences and, take care of yourself in order to like continue to be able to produce work.
Hmm.
You can't just destroy your life.
Yeah. It's one thing to be consumed by it, but there's another thing just to like ram yourself into the ground to the point where like this isn't going the direction I wanted, and I'm not giving myself the mindset or the free space in my mind to like let an answer come to me. I think when you're drilling too hard and you're just like going too much at it, you're just going to keep on running roadblock after roadblock. And especially with art, I feel like when I'm working on whatever little sketch or whatever I'm doing, inking, penciling something real quick, if I'm just running into roadblocks and I'm not satisfied how this face is coming out or hand, I need to learn how to just like put my pencil down and be like, I need to do something else for a bit because it's just not going to work right now. Do you ever run into moments like that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There's been pages that where, you finish the page and you're just like, this isn't working. I need to put this down, either go do something else or just move on to another page and then come back to that later and touch it up or just redraw it. It's just sometimes you have to step away from that specific piece that you're working on and just let it breathe for a little bit and come at it with a little bit of a different mindset.
Yeah. And you doing the literally everything for your book. What was the timeline from when you started to when you got I guess the first bootleg copy out, I want to say, because that was black and white before you even hit colors.
Right.
What was your timeline that you were kind of developing that whole story?
I started writing in April. I think I had it, I think September. I had it printed and like in hand.
Oh, dang.
Probably took about a month to write it out and then just started drawing.
Oh, okay, cool. Dude, that's a great turnaround. Honestly, that's miraculous for a lot of measures. Is a lot of the art, those for watching our YouTube right now, is the art in the background yours or is that from various artists as well?
This is a whole bunch of my friends. Like this is actually the pinup in the book that you've got on the back wall
Oh,
now.
nice. Oh, yeah.
That's my buddy Colin Eaton. I just hired him to do a pinup because I love his art style. It's very like Mignola-esque, that
Mhm.
like same camp as like a Mignola or a Andrew Macklin or something. And it's so different from what I do. So it's in the place of honor behind me.
What I love about that is that, you know, those are all your friends and you have like independent art surrounding you. I think when we have too much of like the Marvel DC stuff surrounding us, we compare ourselves too heavily as artists to like the styles and like, I guess I hate to say it, but like the skill level that they put themselves up on. And it could kind of cripple an artist a little way. But by having some of your friends' art, some actual like various styles of art, it's more encouraging as a creator. um and I mean that like in such a good way, because I feel like if you look at certain styles, you're gonna want to stop and be like, I'm never gonna hit those, you know, plateaus. I'm never gonna hit that level of art. I'm never gonna hit like that skill set because my art doesn't look like that. That means I might never make a comic. But if you surround yourselves with like art that's, you know, versatile and different, and you know, different fluctuations of, you know, everything from black and white to the colors you have back there to like the splatters of color, like that's going to inspire you more and let you know like how freeing art is. And your book especially is one of those books where I'm looking at it and I'm like looking at the paneling and how you worked out some stuff and what I've been trying to work on myself the past year. And it's like, I bet I could make a comic. Like if Jeff is pulling this off and if he's able to complete a book and get this out there and get this in print, like I bet if I put the time and effort into it, I can do it. And I it's hard to come across people and books that, you know, when I look at stuff where I'm just like, you know what, I'm never going to understand it. But like your paneling and your storytelling really like resonated with me to be like, I want to give a valiant attempt sometime to like do this. Cause even with your storytelling, very fluid, very clear. And I could tell you, I feel like you're a writer first. I could be wrong, but, and then like evolved into your art. But like it's your storytelling's so good. That's where I kind of pull from that. Like your writing skill set is so good. Um, and your art, it just like it resonated with me because it reminded me of old like 70s style, like that Robert Crumb type of independent art that was coming out. And I was like, this is the route I need to like remind myself I'm in. Like indie comics is going to be so different from any other style. And when I look at all these creators' art, I'm literally like, I bet I could make a book. Like, what is stopping me? And that's the kind of roadblock I'm trying to get like out of people's way for doing the show, is like, there's nothing stopping you. And so I'm trying to be a testament to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the amazing thing about comics is anybody can do it. I've got like friends and coworkers all the time like, man, it's so crazy that you can do that. I could never do that. But it's like, you just got to put in a little bit of time. And even if it's not at, and, you know, Marvel and DC have their house styles and that's cool and all, but it doesn't have to be at that specific, like polished professional level. It's all about just like having the experience of creating something. You know?
Yeah, you're creating, you're crafting with your hands, and what you produce and what your hand produces is your style. And not enough people accept that style and move forward with that. And that's something I'm trying to work through myself because I'm very hesitant on doing certain things or experimenting on certain things. Social media is so judgmental. Social media people jump on stuff or try to correct or maybe offer unsolicited advice and whatnot. Do you ever encounter any of those roadblocks while you're producing your work, or do you have any fears that you've been trying to like overcome as you're doing it? Or now that you're on your second book, you're kind of just like, this is all me. This is 100% it. Like, what are you doing to get past some of that?
I've always been kind of nervous, and I'm always my own worst critic when it comes to that sort of thing, be it art, writing, anything. But mostly, I'm just kind of accepting that I am where I am, and I don't know, nobody creates their magnum opus their first time around, right? It's always like decades into their career when they really create that like defining work of what they are. So I'm really proud of the work I'm doing with Skin of My Teeth, but is it going to be my magnum opus, the greatest thing I ever create? No. And it's okay that it's just a representation of who I am right now. You know, it doesn't need to be. I mean, you look at like, so a huge influence for me is like the like Mirage Studios Ninja Turtles books and all that stuff. Yeah. Like, look at some of the early stuff. I mean, it's rough, it's scribbly, it's got the splatters and tones everywhere. Some of the later, as they went on, you know, it got more polished, more professional. They would hire other artists and it would be cleaner and more like bright. And, you know, then you have the Saturday morning cartoons, people working on that. They didn't start there though, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They started with that like one self-published book, and that's the coolest thing to me, is like just having the guts to get out there and do it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's what more of us are trying to do. And I think that's what the indie comic community is trying to do more and more. It's just like, all right, guys, grab your art supplies. We're all going to just go have fun and make comics, and we're all going to love and support each other while we do it. And like you said, like, have you put out books before this? I'm not too sure how much of your work you had previously before this one, because this one is just, I feel like it's on such a higher quality. I feel like you should have other books like that came before it.
I had one shot that I did before this called My Coworker's a Vampire. Did that I put that out at the beginning of 2022. That took me a year and a half to do. So that I'm definitely like getting a little bit quicker as I go along. But even before that, I've been drawing comics since I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I mean, there's stuff even before that was comic-ish, like more Sunday strip kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But when I was like 11 and 12, that's when I like really started like, hey, here's issue number 1 of like my character and his story. And I drew probably a dozen stories over the course of middle school and high school that never really saw the light of day.
Oh, dude, that's even more exciting. That's stuff I want to see too. I feel like that's the stuff that you kind of put out. And do you ever reflect back, or even like go through a box that has some of that old work to see your progression?
Yeah, actually, this past week I did a big like organization of like all my like art files and stuff, and I saw it and I was like, wow. There's some when you're 15, you're not creating like the best work ever. You're still learning a lot, but there was some really cool stuff that I was like, oh man, I did really like that. I was so proud of that. And it was fun. Looking back and just seeing how far you come from. I mean, even My Coworker's a Vampire to Skin of My Teeth #1, and Skin of My Teeth #1 to Skin of My Teeth #2. There's big jumps, at least jumps that I can see. It might not be obvious to other people, but.
And what do you think are some of the things you feel like you need to work on, or you've worked on over the years to kind of improve? Like, what are like the main parts of your art that you're just like, man, I just took me forever to figure this out, and once I did, I could do it?
Yeah, just a lot of anatomy stuff. Like hands are ridiculously hard to like, because they can portray so much emotion and character, and it's always something that I've had a tough time with. And then, I draw a lot of faces that end up looking kind of similar. I've been working on getting away from that, and then just general composition and incorporating more backgrounds instead of just like, we're in shadows, we're gonna black out the whole background.
I feel like that's a big part too. Backgrounds, it's so easy in a comic to kind of just be like, okay, I could just do whatever. I could just put color. I could just make that fade with whatever. But like actually putting the time and patience into a background, it, almost a missed opportunity. But when you do see it, it's like a total win. And you were saying that, you wrote this in April, you had the Kickstarter, and later on that year, and it was already complete. Like, what do you do to increase your time? Or what practices do you put into play to help you with your timing?
Just like finding the time to work on stuff, or just like, what do you mean?
Just to like work faster at that point, as like building up that skill set.
Just the more you draw, the better you get at it, and the more likely you are to just like get something on the first try instead of like the 10th try.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. It's and honestly, when I do months like Inktober, I think are just such a good practice set for creators, and that's what really got me into the like whole mindset of like, okay, if I could just do one pencil drawing, maybe not ink and color it on that same day, but at least getting a pencil drawing down a day and nailing that, and then moving on and just switching it as much as possible. And then I try to spend like the next month or two really figuring out the inking, because I feel like inking is where pencils are great, but it's like the outline. It's like when you're writing a story, you're just like, all right, I got this loose idea. It's a solid outline for me to start, and then inking is when the real scripting starts, and putting it all down and breaking it up in the panels and all that. What's your process like, being your own kind of everything at this point? Do you do your paneling and then you write the story to it, or are you a scripter and you move forward like that?
Yeah, I write a script ahead of time. I wrote the first draft fully in like the notes app of my phone, just like on lunch break and stuff at work, and then pasted it into Word, kind of edited it all into like the right formatting and stuff so it would all make sense. Then print it out, made a bunch of notes in the margins as far as like page layouts and stuff, and started penciling. I don't know. It's kind of just a natural process at this point where it just kind of flows from one thing to another. And as you're drawing, some things will change. And I mean, even like Skin of My Teeth #2, what's on Kickstarter right now, I completely, right before I launched the campaign, I redrew 2 pages, completely rewrote and redrew 2 pages. So,
oh, wow. Okay. Do the design work on your book as well, or do you send that out to have someone else kind of like format it?
I do everything.
Love it. What kind of lettering do you do when you work on it? Is it hand or using like computer generated lettering?
I use a font to letter it. That's the one thing that's one thing I've been working on. I've done a couple, like I did a couple anthology stories and a couple like short stories that I've hand lettered. None of it is out quite yet, but it's something that I'm working on and a skill that I'm trying to have, because that's what all the great independent comic artists did. That's not to mention it's just a big time saver, because
Oh, yeah.
lettering on the computer, lettering on the computer is probably like just the biggest slog of the entire process. That was like when I did My Coworker's a Vampire, literally like it was 3 months of me just trying to letter it and getting frustrated and walking away for a few days and then coming back and trying again.
I know. I've tried, as an early attempt of being like, okay, well, if I'm a writer, I got to develop other skills. Like, oh, lettering, that makes sense. It seems like the easiest thing out of all of them I could choose from. Colorist, inker, pencil, or whatever. Let's do lettering. And I started looking into like how Terry Moore does his lettering with what's it called, the little clear device. I'm spacing out the name of it.
Oh, the Ames Guide.
Ames Guide. Yeah, there you go. And I got one of those and I took some hacks at it and I tried following some like step-by-step tutorials. And I was like, this is the hardest, most draining thing I've ever had to do. And it's so intricate and it's so like on point. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I could just like figure out a way to just make my lettering and put it into a computer, because like either way, like the Ames Guide or learning a whole new processor, I feel like if you're going to figure out lettering, go one of those 2 routes, and stick to one for a while before you switch, because it's such a pain on some parts, I think the most beneficial part is maybe like SFX sounds, and you could use Photoshop to really like, or Illustrator to really change up some things. But even then, kind of hand drawing it or doing it by hand, I'm always more inclined to do that. Do you like working traditionally more than digitally?
Yeah, just about everything I do, apart from the lettering and coloring, is traditional.
Nice.
Just makes way more sense in my head. I've got like a tablet and stuff that I've tried drawing with, and it just doesn't translate from my head to the screen like it does with paper. Not to mention just the texturing and everything of like scratchy ink on Bristol board. It's a totally visceral experience that's you don't get by just like a smooth pen on a smooth screen. This doesn't quite work the same way.
100% agree with you, dude. I've tried with Procreate, and I figured, I worked at like Apple for a while and everything, and then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get an iPad. I'm learning how to draw. I'm gonna do all this stuff, but like, and I respect the creators who can do it, because I feel like they could produce work just like anywhere at that point. But I literally need like a pencil and paper in front of me for me to do it. Because it's that sensation, it's that grind of the lead against the whatever material paper you're using, and that's what like really makes me feel connected to the art, and that's what makes me really like understand and like have a real, I guess, being a musician and working with my fingers and learning bass and everything, that's where I have that like physical need to have it there. But when I do digital stuff, I can't even like get the same line out that I can with a pencil. It's 100% different on my technique.
Yeah, it's almost like it homogenizes what you do. And I've got friends that like do digital work, and they do like amazing, like vibrant, like energetic digital work, and it's completely them. But then when I try and use the same tools, I don't know, it just kind of homogenizes and takes away like the grit of what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. And your coloring process, do you flatten your colors as you go, and do layers and all that type of stuff? Or are you very much like a small layer person that does like, just your pen, like your inks, and then you kind of just do your, a couple shades above, on like Procreate or, whatever program you use?
Yeah, well, I've got 5 or 6 different layers. I've got like 4 tone patterns, and then like a couple different like effects brushes, like for the splatter and stuff that I use to color. So each one of those is its own layer. That way I can, you can kind of build up what each object is, and then if something gets too dark or too light, you can always like take away or add as needed, instead of like getting stuck on like the one layer and you're like, oh well, now I've got to erase that and start from scratch.
Yeah, I know. I've that was a quick learning thing of and utilizing layers of being like, man, I'm making a lot of progress. Oh, I made a mistake. Let me erase this, and then you erase like a whole chunk of your work, and you're like, I don't even know how I could fix or correct, or you try to work with your mistakes no matter what, like you would natural, actual physical coloring and everything. But sometimes you're just like, man, this did not go the route I expected to at this point. When it comes to coloring, I noticed like the palette, we were just talking about with the reds and all that, you kind of envision that from the beginning, and you work with a smaller palette. Is that on purpose, or is that just like, is that something you kind of focus on to make, coloring easier and work with a smaller palette? Or do you just feel like the tone of the book required a smaller palette like this?
Yeah, it was kind of like a combination of all of those things. Like I mentioned earlier, like the original Ninja Turtles books were a big influence on me. I've always just loved like the line work with the tones. That's just such a huge part of what I love about that era of independent comics. So I really wanted to embody that, and then the speed thing as well. It's definitely a big help. Just the one color versus like all the different colors. I colored a short story I did for an anthology, and it took me a month to color 6 pages. It took so long. But
And that's just because you had such a wider arsenal at that point to kind of pull from?
Yeah, just picking the different colors and making all those decisions. It's because that's not my main thing. I don't have a ton of practice doing it. I can do it, but it's not like I'm not a professional colorist who like has all that stuff figured out. So I'm kind of like picking and choosing and trying to figure out as I go along, and it takes a very long time. So reducing it just to that, like the red tones, it makes it much simpler, and it just really like fits that like like Eerie magazine or something from back in the day, that kind of vibe.
It's exactly what I got, and that's what attracted to me, because I know you and me hadn't met before your first Kickstarter. I think I saw someone sharing a post, and it was the cover art I saw, and then I saw another post of it later on, and I'm like, man, I'm just really attracted to this this art on this book. And it's when you're looking at indie books, especially the art is probably what's going to draw you in before the story. And that's what you kind of get with the your audience and connect with. And I feel like yours just like stood out in such like a 70s cartoony like indie way, that I was just like, damn, this is a true indie creator. Like, who do you pull your influences from, and what were you kind of like practicing or working on, you maybe not to mimic, but pulling from creatively as you worked on this?
I mean, I've said a couple times already, the original Mirage Studios guys, with those old school comics, the Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird, Jim Lawson, Eric Talbot, all those guys, huge influence. Always loved like Sean Murphy's black and white ink work. Like it's very detailed, and it's just, you can really feel the texture of what he does on the paper, and I really like that. And Ted McKeever. There we go. That's what I was thinking. Cool. Ted McKeever. Are you familiar with his work?
That name sounds familiar in my head. I think I have to look it up to like fully define it. But name us some examples to look up. Yeah, like
Metropole, or it's the one I really liked. He has a book called Plastic Forks that came out through Marvel's Comics. Yeah, so that's painted, so it's a little bit different, but it's still just that like weird energy of like these grotesque shapes and all just big, messy, like almost Sienkiewicz-esque work. And I'm trying to think. He did, what's the one I really liked? Eddie Current. Eddie Current was great. That was a black and white book, so that was probably more influential versus Plastic Forks, because it was just the inks, big chunky lines. He's a big influence on the way I draw.
I think that's what I loved about your work too, is like the thickness on your lines. That's something I had to kind of overcome with inking, was like I was doing a lot of real thin lines and I just didn't feel like it was fleshed out enough. And looking at yours and how you really incorporate your blacks, knowing how to like really ink your page and put the blacks out there really are going to emphasize your work a lot more. And just like flipping through your book when I got it, and I got to finally sit down and read it, I was like, man, this is what I want to aim for if I'm playing with panels and, types of, images and doing my own stuff on my own. Like, you encompass so much and you made a book seem like so within reach. I know there's so much that goes into a book and like the patience and like the amount of work, but it's just like, man, you make it feel like, oh, I can do this. And it's hard for an artist to go out there, especially like an indie artist, to be like, this is inspiring enough to show you that this is how easy it can look, like you are able to like simplify your images enough to bring that clarity of the storytelling, but at the same time be like, man, this is, if you guys do it right, if you guys pay attention to the line work here, you could really express a lot without having to like really kill yourself. What I've seen with, some books is just like, it's so much is happening. It's taking so long for these books to come out. Creators lose interest. People aren't doing follow-ups. It's taking, 3 years between issue 1 and issue 2. But your timing on everything, the fact that you're already running your second book on Kickstarter, and, I'm curious when you're planning on doing your next couple issues, if there's going to be more issues of this series, and what your timeline looks like on that.
Definitely doing more. It's going to be 4 issues in total eventually. It's all written, ready to go. Once I wrap up the campaign and get the book off to the printer, that's when I'm going to start drawing it. Hoping to shooting for around like March or April to run a campaign for the 3rd issue. That way, really keep the ball rolling and not get stuck in just not continuing on with the series. Like you said, there's way too many indie books where you never see an issue number 2, or years later you'll get another installment or something. And I don't know, not everybody can be like a Kelly Jones or somebody like that with like that super dense, like super detailed, crazy artwork. Sometimes, that's what indie comics is just like the DIY aspect of it, and it's not little imperfections and personality that you don't get with like those big house style publishers.
100%. And that's what comes out of your book, is that like personality, and that like just it feels unique. And that's what's so admirable about it, is that you're developing a style, is that you're making it just like fun to look at a different book. And I think it stands out among the racks of like other indie books and among the racks of anything else I'm seeing on the stands right now. Even down to your font on the cover of the book, man, it's so much fun. I really I'm enjoying reading it. I can't wait to read issue 2. I'm so glad that you have like a consistency and a consideration of like putting out your books on like a time schedule, and working through them to finish up the story, so that people are going to just keep on remembering about it. And I feel like if you keep pumping them out the way you are and keeping us updated on it, like it's a good pacing. You don't want to break your audience's budget or their bank, because you're putting them out too fast, but you're giving us enough time to get it, digest it, or even let it sit in like our to be read pile for just a moment and then be like, oh, issue 2 is already on Kickstarter, let me get that right now to like make sure I want to back this, and then picking it up and moving forward with the story. So I feel like your whole approach to everything so far has just been very admirable, and I'm so excited it's bringing you some success. Why don't you tell us like where we can find you and what your plans are for 2024?
You can find me on Instagram at Lorentz Artwork. I've got a website, lorentzartwork.com. I've got some previews, and there's actually some like 24-hour Comics Day challenges that I've done that are up on there. It's a full 24-page comic for free you can read on there. As far as 2024 goes, just more skin in my teeth. Going to try and hit up some conventions throughout the Northeast. I know the only thing that I've got booked for sure right now is the Indie Comics Creator Con in March down in Connecticut, which is, that's 3 states away from me. So it's a bit of a trip for me, but for most other people, it's probably a bit closer as far as the New York and all that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only show I've got booked right now, but I'm planning on doing a good amount throughout the year. And just more comics.
Nice, dude. I love to hear it. I love it. I mean, that's the way of the artist, especially the artist who does everything, you know? I admire your skill, I admire your talent, I admire what you're doing and how you're running your show. And Jeff, this has been a pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait to have you back on another episode. So we can continue like unraveling like just this creator journey. I think not enough people put themselves out there the way you do, and not enough people take the risk of like, I'm gonna make and write and draw and produce my own work, and no one's gonna stop me, and I'm gonna make this. So if you guys are ready for it, great, and if you're not, it's still happening. And that's just the way you need to do it in indie comics. Thank you so much today, and thanks for hanging.